There's an origin story of the Jewish people which actually sets a paradigm both for our spiritual striving as a nation and our traveling as individuals both forward and into self. That's a tall order. It comes from the parsha titled Lech Lecha, which means go forward into yourself. Midrash has it as Lechi Lach as well. You have Abraham and Sarah who are, and again, every time we talk Torah, you're supposed to see yourself in the Torah. We're supposed to see ourselves, our story in the Torah, so that it's a continuous evolving story and document. Abraham and Sarah were in the land of Haran, sort of doing their thing. And it seems like they were doing fine. Not great, but fine. They had enough, and they were not discovering, as a result of being fine, their life's purpose. Everything was just okay. Until one day they get the call from God. This is where you get the idea of a calling. Lech lecha, lechi lach. Take yourself forward from this place that you're fine and go forward with me as your partner, says God, towards this land that I'm going to show you. Now, this land turns out to be Israel. This is the paradigm. Lech lecha is both an imperative, right? Like go, sit, take yourself forward, an imperative, but also a reflexive. So it is both at the same time, take yourself forward and take yourself inward at the same time. So many of us who've done any type of real travel understand that when you are traveling, you learn a ton about yourself and the world around you. But this particular commandment isn't just to take yourself forward and travel, it's to take yourself forward and travel to this land that I will show you, to this place called Israel. Now, there were many people over the last year who, when they found out that Stacy and I were going to be chaperones for 27, 16, and 17-year-olds, said that we are crazy. It's not something that most people would willingly subject themselves to. But I will tell you that these teens were amazing. And a lot of them they and their families, almost all had never been to Israel before. And so there was a tremendous amount of trust. There really was a call of lech lecha, lechi lach. Take yourself forward to this place that you haven't been to yet, that you've heard of, that you've read about, that you've studied, but you don't know. There's an act of faith in that. Lech lecha, lechi lach. So for more than a year, we put together the itinerary, and we had a very particular agenda, and that is we wanted to have each one of our teens, we didn't know there was going to be so many, we were glad there were, each one of the teens, by the end of our 10-day or so trip, fall in love with Israel, engage with Israel, understand Israel with all its complexities. By the way, in America, we've got July 4th coming up. We live in a complex country. Israel is a complex country too. To understand the complexities, to engage with the country, with the people, to fall in love with it, despite its imperfections, or maybe because of them. To understand their history, to connect to one another, to walk in the footsteps of their ancestors, to see that we are all Jews connected not just by history, but a destiny. That's a pretty tall order for a 10-day trip. So we spent time. We spent a lot of time putting together an itinerary, something that we hoped, because there is some jazz to this, we hope that would allow them to connect to each other through bonding, that there would be a serious component of education, but also tons of fun. And as Stacy and I discovered, a trip with 16 and 17-year-olds is a very active trip. Very, very active. And that's also part of what made it fun, because it was so active. So this was a fairly tall order. And it couldn't have come at a more important time. If you look at where we are as a Jewish people with our relationship, our evolving relationship with the state of Israel, right? With Israelis' evolving relationship with their state. Sometimes called the Great Jewish Experiment. What happens when you put millions of Jews together from all different corners of the earth? Give them a country. What will they come up with? What will they do? What won't they do? The Great Jewish Experiment. So to somehow tap into that as a group, as individuals, and to have every single one of them engage in the lech lecha, the lechi lach, the spiritual journey forward, the physical journey forward, and the spiritual journey inward, all at the same time. We flew through Toronto. Why? Because it saved a couple bucks times 27, and it added up. We flew through Toronto, and by the time we got to Israel, of course, everybody was sleepless and jet-lagged. So what did we do? We toured. Because they're 16 and 17, and we figured they could just power through it. And I'm going to share a couple of details about the different days. But the one that I want to share with you on this first particular day was perhaps the most awkward part of the whole trip. And that is that we went to this very ritzy part of Tel Aviv, this one particular neighborhood, to a dance studio run by a famous Israeli choreographer named Gaga. He had the name way before Lady Gaga. And he's famous. Now, I don't know that much about dance, but trust me, my wife tells me he's famous, so he's famous. Okay? And the type of dance that we did as a group of 27 teens plus Stacy and I in this room, there's no music, right? It's a lot of movement, sort of directed movement. We're required to look at one another. And you can imagine how awkward this would be under the best of circumstances. And it took a little while. The instructor got a little bit testy with us because there was a lot of laughing and giggling, but at some point the group got into it. Until at the end of the sweaty hour, we sat down and he started unpacking with us. This Israeli in tights with his nose ring and his crazy clothing started unpacking with us. What is this form of dance? And one of the things that came up was, at least there is a thought, that this type of dance was reflective of the Israeli spirit, right? There's some loose structure to it, but there's a ton of innovation. There's some group work that happens, but there's a lot of individualistic movement. And it's very unorthodox, even though it somehow winds up working out. What a great way to start the trip. As one of the leaders, I also very much wanted them to get out of their comfort zone and to be comfortable getting out of their comfort zone, because I wanted them to be open to what was going to be happening, we hoped, over the next 10 days. So, by the time we got back to our hostel that evening, everybody was really, really ready for sleep, all right? And that's what more or less we did. We did a room check every night. Stacy and I were putting in 17, 18-hour waking days, end over end over end, but it worked out very well. The next morning we woke up and we went and did an archaeological dig. And we were digging in these caverns, these caves of a city that the Maccabees had conquered thousands of years ago. And we were pulling up pottery shards and learning about the civilizations, one built on top of the next, top of the next. We were literally digging into history. And there was a lot of laughter, and a lot of teamwork as those chisels went up and down and the pottery shards were shaken. And everybody got to go home with some cleared pottery by the group, stuff that wasn't that important. Okay? So from there, we spent time in the Tel Aviv markets. We went to the beach and got to see the vibrancy of Tel Aviv, right? Wall to wall with Israelis, mostly Jews, who were engaged on the beach in capoeira and fire dancing and that paddle game that they play back and forth all day long, and swimming and hanging out, seeing the vibrancy of, for the most part, secular Israel society. And we hopped on a boat and took a cruise around the Jaffa harbor. And there was something really special about blasting the Israeli tunes as we're overlooking this ancient port, the same port which Jonah had tried to flee from, the same port that, which king? One of the kings had his boats coming in to do his big building project. It wasn't Herod, it was before him, but the same one. And I remember talking with a number of the kids as we're looking out into the horizon. Isn't this just the ultimate symbol of where their life is right now? Everything open, everything ahead of them, all opportunities right there, surrounded by friends and tradition, right? And moving into the world. It was a tangible, beautiful moment. The next morning, and there's lots that I'm not going over. These were long days. But the next morning, we went to Ramla, and we went to the city of Lod, which is, they claim, the second oldest city in the world. In the world. And we looked at a mosaic that had been rescued recently with 2.5 million pieces to it, which is why they had built a building around the mosaic on the floor. That was fascinating, but that wasn't the most fascinating part of this piece of the adventure. Our tour guide was an Israeli Arab Muslim woman named Nashua. And I always remember that because it's also a city in New Hampshire. And afterwards, our guide, whose name was Tuvia, asked her if she would spend time with us and sit in a circle with us and talk to us about what was it like to be a minority in Israel? What was it like to be Muslim? What was it like to be a woman, right, in Israel? And she answered us pretty frankly. Most of her answers we could digest fairly easily. Some of them we had to think about for a while, but we got an honest look, at least in that moment, it seemed to be an honest look, of some of the diversity, not all kumbaya, within the Israeli society. And from there, we went to Samir's restaurant, which is where Rabbi Max spent a lot of time in his year in Israel. They loved Rabbi Max so much that they rolled out the red carpet. This was owned by a Christian Palestinian family. They rolled out the red carpet. They shot videos for me to send to Rabbi Max, and they treated us with such hospitality that the little grandma who ran the place, everybody wanted to bring her home. From there, we went to Nahalat Binyamin Arts Fair, which happens in Tel Aviv, and we saw some street crafts and also went through the market. And this is with all the sights and the smells and the noise and the touching. It's mayhem, but it's mayhem that you quickly feel yourself become a part of, right? Now, all along, we kept on emphasizing this is not just an exotic vacation somewhere. This is to your, whether you've been here or not, to your second home. And these people, most of them who you see, if your relatives had zigged instead of zagged, you'd be there. And they might be here. Cousins, right? Over and over again, the kids kept on commenting that everybody they met with was so welcoming and so friendly. Some of the guys on the trip played a game where they would dare each other to go and talk to random people to start real conversations. And they had real conversations because the Israelis are not afraid to share, right? Conversations with women in their 60s who moved from France, and guys who were working in the coffee shops, and the cab drivers and the bus drivers. Two of our young men had coffee with two young women who were wearing big guns on their backs, and that was a first for them, right? So all of this was, how do you get involved enough to understand that this thing is not just an idea, it is a vibrant, living lifestyle, state, country, dream. And the kids very quickly got into the living piece of it all. The next morning, we went to Caesarea. Caesarea is on the coast. It was one of King Herod's many building projects. He had one of his many palaces there. It has one of the most beautiful restored theaters, not amphitheaters, right? Theaters. And they also have a hippodrome that's been restored. Think of Ben-Hur with the horse racing. You can cruise around. But that wasn't the exciting part for us. I mean, that was exciting. But what's most exciting is that they just this last year opened it up so that you can put on snorkel equipment and snorkel over the ruins that have not yet been fully excavated. This has just opened up. Now, what was exciting about this, one, we did it. Two, for most of the kids, this is their first time snorkeling. And it wasn't the easiest snorkeling. So again, getting out of their comfort zone, doing this together, snorkeling over ruins that were not hundreds, thousands of years old, and doing this together. From there, we went to a Druze village. The Druze are a minority group in Israel who are, by their religious doctrine, extremely patriotic, not just to the secular country that they're in, but to Israel specifically. They serve in the IDF. A lot of them serve in those special Fauda-type units because they look and speak the part. We had a fascinating conversation with a young Druze gentleman right after lunch who spoke to us as much as he was able to or allowed to about their religion, which is all about reincarnation, right? And the kids had lots and lots of questions for him about the religion, but the other piece of the religion is if you know, you're not supposed to tell. It's a secret. So most of his answers either were, I don't know, or I can't tell you. But it was still fascinating, again, to see a different aspect of this society, right, in this Druze village. From there, we went to Zichron Yaakov, and we met with a gentleman named Ofer Eden. And Ofer had served in one of the battle units during the Yom Kippur War and had lost an arm and partial use of his other hand. And his was an inspirational story of how he continued in his ups and downs, having had his life and physique and psyche and social life totally changed by this war and the incident. But he welcomed us into his home. He shared his story and he inspired us, meaning another aspect of Israeli society. The next morning, we went to the Syrian border and we talked to Captain Yaakov Sullivan. Now, Yaakov Sullivan, young guy, maybe in his late 20s, and he had just been on a week-long mission where he told us that he had gotten a total of 10 hours sleep. Now, what was amazing to me was not just that he was there without having slept, he was there talking to our group because he was friends with our guide, but that his wife had guests at their house waiting to have breakfast with him as a celebration of him returning, and he was spending time with us. And she kept on calling him, and you could see him sweating as he was, yes, dear, just a couple more minutes, right? But he really wanted to spend time with us. He told us some of the stories of the Yom Kippur War, including one particular battle and sort of Alamo-type holdout that happened there. And then we as a group got to explore with him a bunker. And this is a big bunker that the IDF has created so that some of the specialized soldiers in the IDF can get accustomed to operating in the dark, in tunnels, so that they can combat tunnel warfare with the enemy trying to burrow under the Israeli border to do harm. So we had this fascinating exercise where everybody put their hand on the shoulder of the person in front of them. All the lights were out. There was no light. And we spent a good 40 minutes weaving our way through this bunker until we got to this one particular room where we were allowed to turn on the lights from our flashlight. He finished the story that he told. And we came out with not just an understanding of the war, okay, but the trust that these soldiers had to have for one another and the extreme circumstances that they had to put themselves through in order to protect what was all around us, and that was the villages and kibbutzim that they were protecting. That was a pretty bonding experience. Yeah. From there, we went to the mighty Jordan River. And the mighty Jordan River is about a fifth the size of the mighty Chattahoochee. And what I loved about this, I've been on the Jordan many, many times on these trips, and you're rafting, you're essentially tubing down the Jordan. And they tell you all the rules when you go in, but I know that the rules aren't really rules. And as soon as we launched, I jumped from one boat to the next boat. And pretty soon our kids were switching boats very quickly. And then I looked and saw that some of our kids were on boats with groups that weren't ours. There's this one great scene where there's a group of Palestinian women with their head covered, and they were sort of stuck in the reeds. And one of the girls on our trip jumped out of our boat, and she walked over and she pulled them out. And then I think jumped on their boat, and then another boat, and there was oars that were stolen. But this again, it was bonding, and it was beautiful, and you saw all types of people coming through, right? What also, and this is a little bit softer, most of the kids, even though they'd been in confirmation for 2 years, meaning that I got them, close to 32 times a year for 2 straight years, a lot of them didn't know each other very well. Right, despite my efforts. And so to see the bonding that happened and the different friend groups beginning to meld very quickly. We also rotated the rooms fairly often, and we had all sorts of tactics that we did to make sure that people got close to each other. But this is the type of thing, hopping raft to raft on the mighty Jordan River, that everybody came out of it, and I said, okay, I think we're finally there. I think we're finally a group. But at this point, we go to Sfat, the northern city that Lakadodi was created in, and we saw a Kabbalistic glass blowing by Shevachaya. There's all sorts of mysticism associated with the different levels of soul and the different levels of God's breath, all relating to glass blowing. The intention, I'm thinking about it, the breath in, getting ready to do something, the beginning of letting it out, and then the full extension of the breath to create something from nothing, right? So she did a wonderful job in Sfat, this blue mountain city. From there, perhaps the most touching moment of the trip, and this is Friday afternoon, or Friday early afternoon, and we need to be in Jerusalem by Shabbat. But we took the time to go to the Lebanese border, and we met with a group of soldiers from the tank unit. And these were soldiers who were a year or two older than our kids. And we had each one of them, they came off as not macho, but shy. And we had each one of them, mostly through translation, introduce themselves, say where they lived, where their family came from, and it was all over the map, how many brothers and sisters they had, and sort of generally what they did as part of the unit. And there was embraces between our kids and these soldiers, and handshakes and tears, and I can't explain to you why it was so emotional, but it was. And reading through the testimonials of the kids, this particular interaction was amongst the most powerful that they had. I think because they realize that as they are getting geared up to throw some elbows to get into the college of their choice and spend their late teens and early 20s in university, right, hopefully doing some studying, right, that their counterparts in Israel are on the Lebanese and Syrian border, right, in tank units, going sleepless nights through hot days to protect the rest of them, right? And then they go to university when they're in their mid to late 20s. So there's a realization of some differences, some privilege, right? But also some of the stakes that go into having a country. What does it mean to have this country, right? That everybody serves. Not everybody. Most people serve, right? So from there, we have our bus ride back to Jerusalem. And our accommodations all the way through, they were appropriate for a teen trip, all right? And the difference was that Stacy and I each had our own room and the kids shared a room, right? But when we get to Jerusalem, it is just pure mayhem. We got there late. We were running late the whole trip. We got there late. Shabbat's coming, and this hotel had a great location but was inexpensive enough that most of the people who were staying there were Israeli religious families with lots of kids, okay? Ultra-Orthodox. So you can imagine the scene. Shabbat's coming. We've got this group of 30 of us sitting in the lobby with our luggage. We're trying to get the rooms. They're handing us the keys. Clearly the rooms aren't right. There's all sorts of mistakes. We're trying to fight with them while everybody else is trying to fight with them. It was a scene. We quickly enough, we get the kids their rooms. Okay, Stacy gets her room, and there's only one problem. We're one room short. So the hotel clerk says to me, "Alti dagi, don't worry. Okay, yesh lanu cheder echad od. We have one more room available." Okay, I don't care as long as there's a room. Well, it turns out that the reason this room was available is because it was a mess. This room had not been stayed in a very, very long time. Didn't matter. I'll get to the room part in a second. Quick change. We give everybody, our original plan was 2 hours to take your time, get ready, Shabbat. Nope, 25 minutes. Everybody be back down here. So everybody gets ready, come down. We take the bus over to the Kotel, okay, the wall. And we go to Robinson's Arch. We go to the egalitarian section for a moment, walking through the Jerusalem streets to get there. And then we start making our way over to the Kotel. And we explained to the kids that wherever you are in the world, every synagogue faces Israel. Here in the West, we face east. If you're on the other side of the world, you face the other side. And if you're in Israel, you face Jerusalem. And if you're in Jerusalem, you face the Kotel. And so we went to the section of wall, the outermost remnants of King Solomon's, courtyard of his temple, okay, the temple, and put our hands on the place where all of our prayers are focused. Not just our prayers, the Jewish prayers throughout the world are focused on this one particular place. And that's where we were. It was surprising to me that some of the kids, including some of the kids who were, really didn't know what to make of all of this. One in particular says she put her hand on the wall and felt a shock of energy going through it. And the reason it's not surprising is because I feel that every time I go to the wall, but not everybody does. And I'm not saying there's anything better or worse, but some people do. And others amongst us said that what they couldn't believe and just cherished and relished was all of the different types of Jews. The ones wearing the big fur hats and the ones wearing the shorts and the army uniforms and the crew cuts and the paper kippas that they pass out at the time, that people were there and they felt like they were a part of something. Now, there's all sorts of politics attached to the kotel and the women's section and the man's section. I don't want to sugarcoat it, but in that moment, it was a powerful, powerful thing for us to experience. And then we came back and had dinner at the hotel, and all the different religious groups were doing their dinners with their singing and their prayers. Okay, now let me get to this little piece of the story, and then we'll start to wrap up. Okay, so it's now midnight. Okay, it's been a long day. We started this day at 7 a.m. And I go to the 6th floor, which is the one floor, Stacey and I both were staying there, which hadn't been renovated in this hotel. So they gave us it wasn't the best. And I go to my room. Now, on the way up to the room, one of the clerks had come up with me, and he come into my room with me and said, I think he said this, my Hebrew isn't always perfect. He said, you have a double door, like this is a double occupancy, and on the other side is another room. You can go into their room, but they can't go into yours, but don't go in. Okay, no problem. I won't I won't go into their room. So it turns out as I'm heading down this hall, there's this loud singing happening, clearly a group of people. And my door connected not to somebody's bedroom, but to a little meeting space, maybe this big, where there was 40 Yemenite rabbinic students crammed in there having a Shabbat sing-along. Getting very, very loud. So I look in, and it's one of these things where no matter what I said or did, it wouldn't matter. They weren't going to be quiet. So when they invited me in, I came in. They sat me in what I thought was the seat of honor. I'm not so sure. They poured me a thimble of beer, and the way that this worked is one group would be singing, and then if another group, wanted a different song, there'd be sort of a battle of the bands type thing. And at a particular point, one of the guys sitting next to me stood up and proceeded to tell a 45-minute story. Interrupted often, and there was shtick. I mean, this guy was Borscht Belt, but Yemenite Borscht Belt. You can go figure. And every time, I guess the story started to lull, different groups would start singing almost in jest of him. I apparently was the comic relief because he kept on having me stand up, speaking to me, but I had a good sense of humor about it. Every time he did that, he was at the end, he would say, l'chaim with the cheers, but then we started doing that thing where you cross the arms. These are the nicest guys in the world. The nicest. Oh, and it was very sweet, because probably 6 or 7 of them, and this is midnight past, had infants with them, either on their laps or in carriages, right? That this is part of what they were doing. So this turned out to be a seminary. This was their once-a-year getaway. And at the end of my rope, so 1:30 or so, I stood up and I said, in my best Hebrew, gentlemen, thank you so much. You're a wonderful group. There's good news and bad news. The good news is you're amazing and don't ever lose us. The bad news is that door there leads to my bedroom and I have to go to sleep. But continue. So about half an hour later, they did finish up, but they invited me the next morning after lunch, and we took the kids to an egalitarian Orthodox synagogue the next morning. So men and women sitting separately with sort of a mosquito netting mechitza down the middle, the Torah in the middle, and the first aliyah from the woman's side, and the second aliyah from the men's side, and so on and so forth. Very, very interesting. But after that, I went and joined these Yemenite rabbinic students, again, for singing after lunch. I brought my son, and before Havdalah, we did it yet again, and this time I brought some more of the kids, right? So this itself was worth the price of admission. The trip kept going, and each day just got better and better, but I want to tell 3 little more pieces, okay, related to what we did before Hashkivenu. So we're in Jerusalem, and one of our evenings consists of what's called a silent traveling disco. Okay? So now imagine, everybody, you each have a headset on, okay? There's music that we're all hearing, and there's a guy who's on a microphone who's speaking. So we can hear the music, and we're dancing, but nobody else can hear a sound, okay? And he was very good about sort of getting us out of our comfort zone and, different people leading it. And then he started to walk us around Jerusalem in different dances. So here you've got this big group, ecstatic, dancing around Jerusalem, okay? And coming up to different people. Like imagine like a 9-year-old Hasidic boy who all of a sudden has 30 people dancing all around him. And everybody said that it was not just one of the highlights of the trip, but one of the most fun things they'd ever done in their life. In their life. Now, this was a highlight, and I'm glad we did it then, because the next morning we went to Yad Vashem. Okay? Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Museum. And there was a method to this all, right? That we have these experiences. This is what we can create together, the Jewish world with all these experiences. And yet, what is the price that's paid when we don't have a place that we can go, right? What happens when we are kicked around and a group decides that they're going to exterminate us because, right? It was what you expect. There were lots of tears. It was very, very hard. For those who've been the Children's Memorial, where there are reflecting candles representing the 1.5 million children murdered in the Holocaust, was nothing short of haunting and resounding. From there, we went to Har Herzl, which is right across the way. That's the military cemetery. And our tour guide, who I've known for 30 years, I know him very well, and he served in Lebanon as a medic. And he brought us to the graves of some of his friends from his unit and shared appropriately stories. And so we got to see the price of having a country, that freedom is not free. And then we finished this particular part of the evening by going to the vibrant market in Jerusalem. And again, seeing the sights and the smells and the sounds and the hustle and bustle of what living Jews and Judaism feels like. That's the only way to finish a day like that. Otherwise, you might just pull the covers above your head and not come out for days. Later that night, we had dinner with Head Schiffer and Diane and the Newports and Peter and Linda. Got to share some stories there. And the trip went on and on for the 10 days or so. Every day we seemed to get deeper. Every day the kids got closer. And every day there was a different level of connection to self, to one another, to their rabbi and I to them, right? To their synagogue, to their Judaism, right? To the Jewish people. I was sharing with a few people, my wife and Rabbi Max and Rabbi Rachel and Ed Schiffer this afternoon, that in my 15 years of being a rabbi, that this trip, and I've led lots of trips, that this trip was by far the most impactful rabbinic thing I've done, that I've been a part of, right? In part because of what we were doing and why we're doing it and who we're doing it with and the age that they are and the place we are in the world. But I think also in part because that was my step in the journey of Lech Lecha and Lech Ilach. So I want to finish by reading two short testimonials from the kids. Two of many. And we're putting together all sorts of stuff. Here's the first one. The 2023 Schiffer Teen Israel Trip was the most incredible trip I've ever been on. This trip was full of amazing activities and many learning experiences. Every day I felt that I grew as a person and learned more about the land and people I came from. The trip didn't only bring me more of a connection to the land, but a connection to my people. I found a new understanding of what it means to actually be Jewish. My favorite activity was hiking Nahalat El Al. This hike displayed the natural beauty of Israel and gave me time to reflect. Going to Israel made me feel at home. This is something I wish everyone could experience. It's a sense of safety and love that you never knew you could have. Here's the second one. My Israel trip experience seems impossible to explain to others. I never expected the overall impact this trip would truly have on me forever. There were so many highlights, but I especially enjoyed feeling at home in this country, so far away from my other home. Getting to really know the people I've known, in quotes, for so many years, while experiencing this once-in-a-lifetime trip was truly incredible. I never expected the genuine connection I felt being in the country, and the people could not have been more welcoming. Experiencing the true pride the people have for their country is something I'll never forget. After this trip, I'm taking away true gratitude for Judaism, more than I ever have. This trip allowed me to truly feel proud, all in caps, to be Jewish. Being the majority rather than the minority, and the ability to be so openly Jewish was such a weird but comforting feeling. Learning about the culture, and especially the IDF, was so much more meaningful physically being there. I have such a different outlook and respect now after being in Israel, and I cannot wait, all in caps, to go back.